The Hawaiian Islands are one of the most isolated island chains in the world. The species that first populated these islands evolved into an incredible array of organisms that help shape the landscape. Sadly, this isolation has left species without the knowledge of how to survive the challenges that appeared with the arrival of humans. Hawaii is now known as the world's extinction capital, and as populations decline for mountain breeding seabirds on the island of Kauai, conservationists are taking a variety of measures to reverse those trends. Having worked in Kauai with these seabirds, I'm now returning to the island to meet with colleagues about their work in protecting these vulnerable species.
My name is Sabra Kauka. I'm a Hawaiian Studies kumu, or teacher here at Island School, and I also have the joy of working with the Hawaiian Studies kupuna, or elders, who teach about life in Hawaii, or life in these islands.
And what do you focus on in your teachings to students with the seabirds?
Well, I think we have a great deal to learn from them, and they have great significance in our culture because very early on, the early navigators, the early explorers, and the ones who first came to the islands, they followed many of these birds. The birds led the way. Our greatest gifts are ones really that are made of feathers. The kahili, the feather standard, the feather cape for the kings. These feathers are placed into emblems, symbols, and art that are given to someone that we hold in high regard.
Hawaii, unfortunately, has experienced many extinctions. A lot of species.
Yeah, I really hate to be the extinction capital of the world, but unfortunately, apparently we are. To me, it's scary because I think they are symbolic of the health of our environment. If we want to prevent their extinction, we have got to continue to educate our young people, our elders, everyone.
What we have here is a typical endangered seabird burrow. It's a Hawaiian petrel. You can see right there, that's the burrow entrance, so the birds are going to come in and out of that. And then the chamber's over there. What's different about this burrow is that when we found it, the chamber had collapsed or been dug up possibly by a pig, and the chick was just sitting there fully exposed, so its backside was in the rain, it was getting wet. So to protect it, we put a little lid over it, and every year since, this bird has fledged successfully. So if you want to come over here, I can show you the chick itself. We'll have to be very quiet because you know, he's sitting there in the dark in his burrow at the moment. We don't want to disturb him too much. This chick also is going to be part of the translocation this year. This is exactly where these birds are coming from. This is going to be one of the chicks that heads out and hopefully fledges successfully. Okay, so he's going to be just down in here. He's actually asleep.
Wow. Oh, that's great.
Isn't that cool? Yeah. Fast asleep. You can see how vulnerable they are. I mean, they're just sitting here in a hole in the ground, easy pickings for all these introduced predators that are out here. Mm-hmm. He's still covered in down. Oh, there he is. Hey, little bit. Whenever people think of seabirds, if they know what a seabird is, they're not thinking of this, right? You're thinking of a coastal area. Here you have these birds flying from the sea and then nesting in these montane forests, many, many kilometers inland. And it's pretty amazing being here and special when it's at night and it's dark and you hear this of the bird and it comes through the trees and then hits its burrow, and that's where it nests. So it's nesting in these forests in holes in the ground. The Hawaiian petrel and the Our Shearwater are Hawaiian endemics, so they're found literally nowhere else in the world. If they disappear here, they're gone forever. So the Newell's is a small puffin shearwater, and it's black on top and white below. It's quite a pretty bird. They're capable of diving 50 meters underwater to chase their prey. Things like neon flying squid. The Hawaiian petrel's a little different from the mules. These guys are more prone to flying along the surface and waiting for flying fish, and then they can take them even as they're jumping out of the water, which is pretty amazing. They're typically arriving in April. They'll spend a little bit of time cleaning up their burrows and making sure everything's ready. They only have one egg, so if the egg fails, that's it for the season. They're long-lived. They live up to maybe 35, 40 years, so that's why they only have one egg at a time. They can put as much investment into raising that single chick. And then they're off to sea, and then they'll fly away, and they'll come back again next year. So completely wedded to the sea and the land. One of the main goals of the project has been to figure out where the birds are breeding on the island. And that's pretty challenging because it's a beautiful area with loads of vegetation, but really steep, hard to work within. They're out at sea during the day, so they only come into the land at night. So we use night vision and our ears to listen to see where the birds are, and then working within those areas to find burrows. Because once you got the burrow, you can start monitoring it over the season and see how their reproductive success rates are, what the threats are to them within that particular area, and so on. They're part of the whole ecosystem. They're going out to sea and they're fishing. They're coming back up here, and with their guano, they're fertilizing the land with all these extremely rich marine nutrients. In the past, there would have been hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these birds up here. They're basically helping to shape the forest as a whole. All the vegetation growing, holding all the land in place. If that's not there, then you get run off into the sea. So it's impacting the watershed, which is what we all rely on for our drinking water, all the way down to the sea itself and the corals beyond. We've been doing these radar surveys, which spans 30 years. And what we found is that for 20 years, the population just crashed. So the mules over 20 years declined by 94%, and the Hawaiian petrels declined by 78%. So you've seen these catastrophic declines. You may get someone saying, why don't you just leave them up there to get on with it, they'll be fine. I can guarantee they will not be fine. And we've seen this time and time again in areas where these birds are not being managed, they're just disappearing. So we're working within these colonies, and we're going to keep on monitoring them and working with all the land managers and predator control teams.
The main predators that our project focuses on removing are cats, rats, pigs, and barn owls in the Ho'oponopoly Natural Area Reserve. All of those were brought by humans to the islands. You'll hear people say these birds are defenseless. The birds aren't really defenseless. Their defense was to find a place 2,000 miles from the nearest landmass and nest there. And we've totally circumvented their defensive strategy by bringing the predators to them. And when we've brought predators here, they found seabirds in burrows, which were incredibly easy pickings. A predator can move through a colony and take out breeding adults, chicks and eggs, and leave just empty burrows that take years to become productive again. Pigs destroy every stage of the nest. They'll root up a nest and they'll eat eggs, chicks, and adults. But the areas we work in are also within a ungulate exclusion fence. That just gets to the root of the problem and stops the pigs from getting into your sensitive areas in the first place. Feral cats are not native anywhere in the world. They are a domesticated species that has been let out into the wild. Those populations inevitably find their way up into the mountainous regions where the seabirds are. When they get up there, they find seabirds sitting in their burrows. A cat that gets up there and learns this can be particularly destructive because they will keep coming back to seabird burrows. They learn their calls, they learn their scent, and they will follow those to these remote colonies and then move through a colony, taking out the burrows one by one until there's no birds left. One misconception is that if you remove cats, you'll have increases in rodent species. However, that's just flatly not true. Cats on an island does not drive rats to extinction. So the best thing we can do is go out and set traps and then hope to catch the animals while the traps are active, but we're not necessarily out. When we are out there and we're removing animals and we're putting in the effort and we're getting more traps out, we see less burrows being depredated. And this means that more chicks are being produced. So let's pull up some maps that we've created. This was an effort that was spearheaded by Alex Dutcher, who's our project specialist. And she had the idea to get some of these satellite collars and put them on the cats to start tracking their movements and to see what they like to move across, where they like to move, how fast they move. And so remember, this is spaced just from 2 individual cats, but this is looking at the scale of the entire island. And you can see that's a pretty sizable chunk for a single cat to be covering. Also, these are cats that are moving in areas where there's barely even any trails and no roads. These are cats that are moving through true wilderness areas. This is what we like to call a heat map. We base this on very high accuracy elevational data. From that, we were able to put together an idea of what are some of the slopes cats most easily move across, and what are some of the slopes they like to avoid. When Alex ran all of this, and she used data we got from satellite tracking collars, the green areas are pretty steep areas. It's not likely that cats will move through these areas. The red areas are areas that cats will most likely be able to move through. And so if we're able to target our trapping into some of these high likelihood movement routes, we're actually able to shut down cat flow across the entire natural area reserve. Already we've seen some initial success with it, and we're hoping to refine it further and to use it more extensively, rather than just saying, let's lay out a grid of 500 traps across the whole area. If we look at this area where cats are most likely to be, we can just put 5 traps here and it might shut down cat movement into a much larger area.
They've got to fly from these mountains to the sea. And the adults are doing this night after night after night all the way through the breeding season. And in a lot of these areas, there's now power lines strung up. And the birds, they haven't evolved with power lines, so they're flying along in the dark and they'll just nail right into the power lines. And either die outright or get injured, or it might cause an abandoned breeding season.
The main problem from beginning of March to December is power line collisions for the adults. And then in the fall, starting around October, is when light attraction issues really start to ramp up. The juveniles are fledging at that time. They're trying to fly out to sea. It's the first time they've ever flown. They're cued in on the moon and the stars, and that's how they navigate at night. So if you have these bright light sources, it alters their behavior such that they land on the streets, in the parking lots, and can be hit by cars. So today I was hiking in to put song meters, acoustic devices, at the base of power poles. They're listening all night long for the sound of a bird hitting the wire. It makes like a ching sound. Pretty much everywhere in the world, people walk under the wires and look for dead birds. But a lot of Kauai, you can't do that. It's impossible to get under the wire. So we knew we had to come up with something different. And so in that first year, we were trying to go out and actually see if acoustics would work. Like see a bird hit and if it would make a unique sound that could be recorded. And up here on the Power Line Trail is where we got the first recording. That's what sort of kicked it all off. All the acoustics we do is validated by people. We would send people in and they would sit at the base of the pole and they would watch with night vision so you can see any bird that flies through. What they're doing is looking at when a bird hits, does it always make a sound? And if it did make a sound, did the song meter get it? And if it did the computer then find it? So that's how we validate the system. Here, they're generally trying to head along this ridge. They're trying to get up to the steeper parts of the mountains. But these wires bend, so as the birds are gaining elevation, there's a natural flight path puts them right in line with the power lines up ahead. We use that information of how many collisions happen throughout the grid, and then we can determine in a year how many strikes would have happened here. Our estimate right now is about 10,000 collisions a year, and because about 7 to 15% of those result in immediate mortalities, the number of mortalities we're looking at is between 1,000 and 1,600 a year. And as we were working through that first season, the problem became clear to me. I mean, it's really obvious now, but it wasn't then, that it's just a visual detection problem. The birds are moving quickly at night and they just can't see this obstacle. So if you make the obstacle visible, then hopefully they would avoid it. And at the time I was in possession of the world's second most powerful handheld laser. It's a light source that isn't light. It won't be an attractant to the bird. The idea was to project the beams between the poles and not hit the wires themselves. Just you're making a new visible wire that the birds can see and fly over. It took a while to get it up and running. So the concept is easy, but the technology is extremely hard. Aiming the lasers was a big challenge. How do you build a device that allows you to hit the other pole accurately? And making a laser a small dot at hundreds of meters distance is actually a larger challenge than I thought. So that required special lenses and many hours of focusing at nighttime at long distances before we even bring them out to the power poles. And Adam Elzinga is the sort of master fabricator and engineer that's been developing the laser housings and the circuit boards and the aiming system for the project. In the tool chest now, we have the lasers. So we have LED diverters that take solar power during the day, charge themselves, and then at night they make a little blink. And we have the flat diverters. We think at nighttime those might work well in areas that do have light pollution, because they'll reflect the light pollution and make the wires more obvious. And you can't use any of those in all locations. So you need a big tool chest. These are some of the things that we could do to start really reducing collisions in the high strike areas.
Power line collisions, we do see a certain set of injuries. We will see areas of feather loss because they've scraped by, they've taken a chunk of feathers away, oftentimes on the head and down the neck or on the cheeks, because that's the part that's impacting first. There's a few places where they cross roads or cross residential areas that people will find them. So the birds that we do get are a subset of the birds that do strike the lines. So this room here is the treatment room. We intake our birds in here, assess them. The room right next to us is our holding room, and that's where the birds are in their rehabilitation. And then right outside the holding room is our pool yard, and that's where we do the conditioning of the birds on the pool. They can get into a bit of tiffs and things on the pool. It gets really noisy out there as they bray at each other. Once they figure things out, though, they do settle down and they do fine. So yesterday, we got a new patient. We've got a Newell shearwater chick in care. So we're gonna go take a look at him. So he has a fairly prominent keel, and at this stage in their development, they should actually have quite a lot of fat on them. These guys grow past the point of fledging weight, and then they slim down before they go fledge. And this guy has got quite a prominent keel, which means there's not a lot of fat reserves. So we're gonna pop him back in his temporary home for now.
So how was he found again?
So he was found outside of his burrow. At this stage, they shouldn't be out of their burrow. It was decided because he was at risk for predation, and the fact that he's a little on the lighter side, and the fact that his parents may or may not be feeding him what he needs to bring him in, and so that we can get him out of here in a good shape and give him the best chance of survival. The official start to the shearwater season, as we call it, is September 15th. Fledgling Newell shearwaters are leaving the burrows for the first time. They're heading out to sea, they have no parental guidance, and they get attracted by light, and they come to the ground. So we put out aid stations all over the island. Technicians from the program go around every single day and check every aid station for any birds that the public has found. And technicians examine the bird, assess it for any injuries, any contamination to the feathers, any reason why this bird isn't healthy and can go out to sea right away. If they're a healthy bird, the bird gets a federal band, which is unique to that bird. And then the technician takes it to areas on the island we've determined are good release sites. They have to make that flight. And if they can't do it to their feeding grounds, that's it for them.
So in the last few years, we've tracked a couple of birds to see what happens to them after they leave the rehabilitation. So this is a Hawaiian petrel. This was a bird that hit a power line. It had a really bad damage to the head. All the feathers had been taken off by its collision with the power line. And it was nursed back to health by Tracy and her team over at the Our Shearwaters program. And then we released it with a satellite tag. After it hit the power line, what we saw was it started its massive epic journey up towards Alaska. And it came bypass Kauai and started on this long journey. It actually ended up over here by Guam before the track eventually dissipated, because the tags are designed to fall off after a couple of months. So it showed two things to me. When they get rehabilitated, they can survive. But also it was a failed breeder, which is important because a lot of these birds are hitting power lines and they're flying off. They're not dropping to the ground, but we don't know what ramifications that has for them on their breeding season. In this particular case, this bird failed, never went back to its burrow. But it was testament to the rehabilitation prowess of the Save Our Shearwaters program. In the mountains, we have National Tropical Botanical Gardens and the Honolulu Natural Air Reserve. So those guys are critical for managing the habitat and preventing the birds from being eaten by predators. And then you have the Translocation project down on the coast. And that's a project involving a huge number of organizations, which is pretty awesome, really, to think about all these different people working together to make sure that these species thrive on Kauai and don't go extinct. So translocation, the idea is that you're taking birds from an area where they are in peril and you're moving them to a safer area. And what you do is you take the chicks. And the idea is to move them to a new site which is super protected and logistically easier to work in. So Nahoku's down at Kilauea Point National Wildlife Refuge. Rather than helicoptering up into mountains, you can drive to this area. It's also got a full predator-proof fence, so it's completely protected. And then there's speaker systems. You're relying on the social nature of the bird to be attracted to the sounds that the speakers are playing. So we're playing mules and Hawaiian petrel sounds, and that creates a sound as if there's a lot of birds in the area, and that should, in theory, attract birds that are flying over. And so you have these two different methods, translocation and social attraction, which combined hopefully create a new colony. We could take each bird and put them in a box and then carry them all the way through the forest back to the helicopter site. And helicopter comes and then takes us to Kilauea, where they'll be met by a team from Pacific Rim who will then take the birds and take them to the Nahoku site. And there they'll then be looked after and fed for 3 or 4 weeks until they fledge.
We're here at Kilauea Point National Wildlife Refuge. It's managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it's managed for migratory seabirds and other endangered or threatened species with the goal of protecting and restoring native habitat and the species in that habitat. My role and my team's role on that day is to give them a health check. So we'll take their weights, we'll take their wing chords and any kind of behavioral data that might seem important, and then we'll get them placed into their burrows as quickly as we can to minimize any kind of stress. The data that we get on the first day is really important. The weight and the wing chord is what I use to age each chick. That first day is my basis of how much I feed them and how much they're going to need over the next few weeks before they go to sea. The most important part of what makes this work, obviously, is a predator-proof fence. You know, we have the fence around that keeps out everything, all predators, even mice, and that's the start. What comes next was a lot of restoration work. We needed to clear a lot of the invasive plants that aren't great for nesting. And then we put in 50 artificial burrows. And that's where we keep the birds, where we take care of them until they fledge. And it's also someday hopefully going to be places that they can breed when they come back.
When Nihoku was first brought to our attention, it was a pretty much developed restoration plan, and we were viewed as the botanical component. So we planted native coastal and dryland adapted plants that produce massive fibrous root systems that would grow very quickly and help to hold down the soil. I was highly encouraged as to how fast the plants that we recommended grew and established. It's going to take a little bit of time to reclaim it, especially since it's surrounded by invasive weedy species. But I'm very confident that with a commitment, it can be reestablished as a native ecosystem. Volcanic soils don't necessarily have all of the nutrients that plants require. Birds nesting in uluhe ferns high up in the mountains, they're bringing in nutrients that are lacking and providing a better habitat for the forest to thrive in. With the birds bringing in and recycling ocean nutrients onto the land, I think the native vegetation at Nihoku will really take advantage of that. It'll only get better once birds start nesting there on a more regular basis. It was exciting for me to watch one of the videos of the first fledgling to come out, and as it stretched its wings, it was flapping around the branches of a native nayo shrub, as opposed to something weedy and not native to the area.
It's really fun leading up to fledging. We start to see them coming out more, practicing more. We see a few false starts. It's almost like they're thinking about it, you know, and we start to see those kind of different behaviors, which is really fun for us and the team, because you know they're getting close. And then one day you just pop the burrow and they're gone. It's just an empty burrow. And it's a good feeling, but it's also kind of like, well, yeah, see you later, hopefully in 4 or 5 years. I'm glad you got to come back. I know myself and the team and all the other organizations are really proud of the direction that that it's headed.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing some game camera footage of birds returning.
I can't wait. I can't wait. That will be a big reward and exciting for everybody. It takes time. You know, it's one of those things. It's not instant gratification. You have to take your rewards in steps. The first milestone is birds flying away, fledging with good numbers, good wing chords. Second milestone will be individuals coming back here. And then obviously the biggest milestone will be translocated birds breeding here on site.
Have you seen people becoming more aware of these species?
So last year at the Shearwater Blessing and Release, prior to that, I heard a comment from one of my elders, one of my kupuna. Oh, that bird. My son is a fisherman and he goes out and all these birds, and what is all the fuss about birds? Okay, the light went on. I said, all right, I am going to plan this blessing to include the elders and the children. And that elder was one of the ones to release a bird. And once she held that bird in her hands, something woke up inside. And that's the whole point of it, wake up inside. I just want them to understand their impact, their connection to these other species. Because we as human beings have a huge impact on all around us.
When you think of these volcanic islands first emerging from the water, it's bare, empty lava rock. There's no nutrients, there's no soil. When seabirds found these islands and started nesting on them, one of the first things they did is they started taking nutrients out of the ocean and depositing them in the form of guano on these islands. So these birds were the reason that soils even formed on these islands at the first place. And knowing that part of the reason that these birds are there and thriving and surviving the way they are is because of the traps we set during the day. That feeling is really incomparable.
The Hawaiians probably didn't really get the concept of the watershed in the modern sense, but I think they appreciated and understood the value of it. And that part of the mountain and that part of the forest is referred to the Wauakua, which is the realm of the gods. Hawaiians generally were not allowed into that zone, and it helped preserve it from being harvested or degraded even up until the coming of Westerners. So preserving anything that comes from that zone, the Wauakua, has got to be a cultural priority as well.
At a large scale, I feel like if we can't take care of the environment and the animals around us, it's a bad sign for humans in general. Like this area right here, when I first started, had a ton of birds calling all night long. Now it's quiet. So the birds are being removed quickly from these areas that have both power lines and predators. We can minimize the power lines and try and reduce collisions as much as we can, but we can never reduce them to zero. So there'll always be a need to still offset the losses at the power lines with the other conservation efforts that are happening on the island.
For people living on Kauai, how can they help?
Basically, when these guys start fledging, keep any unnecessary lights off or your blinds covered, and just be aware when you're driving the island or you're out in your backyard or anything that these birds might be attracted to any uncovered light sources. What people can do if they find a downed bird is they can take a clean cloth, put it over the bird, scoop the bird up, put it into a well-ventilated container for transport, and then take it to one of these aid stations or the Kauai Humane Society.
I believe 100% that the birds are going to come back. And I think it's just a matter of time. As long as we have all the caring and really passionate conservationists that we have in Hawaii, we can save a lot of these species. I'm really proud to be a part of it and just work with the team that I work with. It's really great.
As things currently stand, the future's bright. They've been doing terribly over the years, but now we know why, and we have the tools available to actually reverse all those threats that they have. So we know how to deal with predators, we know about translocation, social attraction. We've figured out how bad the power line collisions are, and we're working on ways to minimize those. I think the key thing with endangered seabird conservation in Kauai is it's a whole bunch of different organizations working hand in hand to make sure that the species thrive and don't go extinct. All these things rely on funding and they rely on people. And if you don't have the funding, then you don't have the people, and then the birds will just start disappearing again. I think the world would be a much poorer place without all these endangered species. You want to make sure that these birds are still here for the next generation, the generation after that.